And good evening. We are doing it live right here in the 5 o'clock hour, Yabba Dabba Do time in Los Angeles, on the air here in 790 KBC, streaming live online worldwide at kbc.com and the on-demand Mottek On Money podcast at kbc.com, Apple, iTunes, all your favorite podcast platforms. Watching the latest news coming out of the Middle East now, Israel says 30 Gaza hostages are children, according to the Jerusalem Post, and the IDF has made strikes in Lebanon, more than 4,600 wounded, 1,400 killed. According to the IDF, at least 203 captives in Gaza, more than 100 still reported missing. We're also watching what's happening with the U.S. military action now. A U.S. Navy warship traveling near Yemen intercepted multiple projectiles. According to Reuters, talking to Pentagon officials, the missiles, according to Israeli media, citing the Pentagon, were launched at Israel. Washington now on heightened alert for activity by Iran-backed groups as regional tensions soar during the Israel-Hamas war. President Biden addressing the nation tonight on the Middle East. We, of course, will be following these developments throughout the evening. As far as financial market reaction is concerned, we did see stocks move lower today with tensions rising in the Middle East as the yield on the 10-year note, which impacts, among other things, fixed-rate mortgage rates, shot higher again today, now trading just below 5%. This following some remarks also by Fed Chairman Jerome Powell. The Dow came in for a closing loss of 251 points, the S&P 500 down 37, and the Nasdaq closed down 128 points. Bond yields had actually pulled back following remarks by the Fed chairman, who said the Fed might need to do more to rein in inflation, but also said policymakers would proceed with caution, language that analysts saw as a signal rates would remain on hold as already expected on November 1st and likely in December as well. Some new readings on the job front today. The latest readings on jobs came in a bit better than expected as the number of people in unemployment lines fell last week to a 9-month low of 198,000. And the latest report on housing showed home sales in September fell to the lowest level seen since 2010 as high mortgage rates continue to deter buyers and sellers alike. We are seeing mortgage rates still hovering at 23-year highs. The price of oil shot higher today, with the benchmark prices topping $90 a barrel as tensions rise in the Middle East. We see the price of crude oil in New York moving up close to $91 a barrel. Governor Newsom has signed a bill that establishes a licensing process for crypto exchanges, which aims to create and provide protections for consumers. That's the idea, anyway. That bill signing coming as the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission has multiple applications for a Bitcoin exchange-traded fund, which spiked on rumors before losing all its gains on Monday. The bill, called AB 39, will establish a licensing program for crypto assets within the Department of Financial Protection and Innovation. The idea is to protect Californians from bad actors and foster responsible innovation. The bill passed with bipartisan support in both the state assembly and the state senate, now signed into law by the governor. Someone you've been seeing on television news for years is making news herself this week. Television news anchor and reporter CHRISTINA PASCUCCI has announced she is running for the California U.S. Senate seat held for years by the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. CHRISTINA PASCUCCI will be joining me live later this hour. And you, the voters, next year will also decide whether to force Los Angeles hotels to house homeless people in hotels with paying guests. I'll discuss that idea tonight with Chip Rogers, President and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. But first, on your money, the markets, the economy, crypto too, and that new regulation here in California. Joining us live now is Brian P. Brooks, the former top bank regulator in the United States, now partner at the law firm O'Melveny & Myers, and former U.S. Controller of the Currency under President Donald J. Trump. Brian P. Brooks, thank you very much for taking the call here. And obviously the financial markets are very nervous these days with what's happening around the world. Give us your assessment of things here at the moment.
Well, Frank, thanks for having me. It's always great to be here. Today was an interesting day in a couple of different markets. And what I've really been looking at this week is the performance of bank stocks. So you probably saw earlier in the week when the biggest banks started reporting earnings, they all had tremendous gains in several businesses and stocks went up. Here I'm talking about companies like Bank of America, Goldman Sachs, and the like. But today, regional banks reported earnings, and regional banks fell between 5 and 10%, depending on what bank you're talking about. And what that tells me is a couple of things. First of all, we have a financial system that's increasingly gravitating toward the biggest institutions being highly dominant and almost every other kind of company having real challenges. And second, The regional banks, because they have smaller capital buffers than the biggest banks, they tend to be signals of a coming credit crisis. And one of the things I'm very worried about is consumer well-being at the moment. We had a couple of years, Frank, where consumers were held afloat by COVID relief payments and other kinds of artificial stimulus. But as interest rates have gone up, borrowing costs have gone up, and the COVID relief has gone away, you can see that consumers are paying more for housing. Their cash reserves are lower than they were 2 years ago. And the overall amount of their spend on recurring debt obligations is the highest it's been in 6 or 7 years. So there's some warning signs ahead that these regional bank stocks are conveying, and I think we really need to pay attention to those.
On the air live with Brian P. Brooks, the former top bank regulator in the United States, and always fantastic to have you on the air with us here. And let's talk about the banks here for a moment. We did hear from the J.P. Morgan Chase CEO, Jamie Dimon. When that earnings report came out, he warned that this is the most dangerous time for the world in decades. Certainly with all that's happening in the world at the moment, banks also very much in the spotlight, the whole financial system, of course, in the spotlight. And you've been keeping track of all this for us since we had those bank failures earlier this year. Give us your assessment of what's happening as far as that's concerned, and how this might lead to ultimately another possible financial crisis.
Yeah, well, so I keep coming back to the idea that the American economy, more than any other economy in the world, has always been held up by consumer spending. That's the thing that makes this economy go. And one of the core inputs into how healthy consumers feel is energy costs. So I think you raise a great point about Jamie's comment about what's going on in the Middle East right now. We haven't seen the last chapter of this, obviously, and people are watching and waiting to see whether Iran becomes involved. Whether if Iran becomes involved, that affects our relations with the Saudis and the oil-producing countries. And one of the big fears that many people have is that we will see, kind of a repeat of what we saw during the Iraq War, or if you go back even farther to the 1970s OPEC crisis. If you were to see gas prices go back up to $7.50 and $8 a gallon in LA County, that's going to put a major crimp in household savings and their ability to spend on consumer goods, which would be terrible for the economy. So I think the punchline here, Frank, is these people who say, oh, we're in for a soft landing and we've avoided a recession and everything looks good, that's all true, as Mike Tyson used to say. It's all great to have a plan until somebody punches you in the face. And I'm a little afraid that world events, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in the Middle East, or God forbid China takes advantage of the situation, there are a lot of geopolitical risk factors out there, and we're really on a knife's edge right now. So I would be very cautious in the coming months.
I think you certainly hit right at the heart of the issue here, the consumer under tremendous pressure these days. And it should also be noted that credit card interest rates are at an all-time high at the moment, and we're seeing mortgage rates at a 23-year high as those bond yields soar. The Fed comments today sent the market moving lower. The Fed chairman making comments today saying the Fed may need to do more to rein in inflation, which is still running, at least double the Fed's target. So what do you think the Fed's next move will be, and how do you think the consumer will hold up in the face of these tremendous challenges that you pointed out?
Well, I'm one of these people who's in the higher for longer camp, which doesn't mean that the Fed will raise interest rates at the next meeting, but I do think there's at least one more rate increase happening this year, possibly at the end of the year. I think the main thing is rates are not going to come down next year, and that means we're going to be dealing with very hard borrowing circumstances for most Americans, not just consumers, but for business borrowers as well, which creates long-term pain on the economy and a long-term drag on growth, since credit is so central to growth. On the inflation front, what I will say is, again, depending on which newspaper you read, you get very, very different views of what's going on. So Paul Krugman, one of the columnists for the New York Times, wrote the other day that if you exclude housing, food, and energy, then inflation has been tamed and we're back down at 2%. But most of your listeners only care about housing, food, and energy. And if you include those factors that all of us pay every day, inflation is nearly double that number, and that's not coming down nearly as fast as Chairman Powell wants to see. That's why you're going to continue to see high discount rates and high mortgage rates for another 18 months at a minimum. All
right, given those regional banks in focus today, we've had big conversations this year following those several big bank failures that we talked about, and certainly still a lot of nervousness in the banking sector with the commercial real estate business very much under pressure. We just had a big commercial real estate conference here that the Real Deal put on, and concerns about that continue to be expressed and the impact on the regional banks. What is your latest assessment on commercial real estate and the impact on the regional banks?
Well, what I've said before is the commercial real estate issue is a big issue, but unlike residential real estate, it's a slow-moving.
Every Monday, Rich Eisen and Chris Brockman react to what's happening in the world of football on Overreaction Monday.
The AFC North. Not all four teams going to make the playoffs.
More likely than not.
More likely than not, right?
Okay.
And I know they've been the king of this jungle for the last few seasons. The Cincinnati Bengals, Rich, are going to miss the playoffs this year.
This is an overreaction. Bengals are not only making the playoffs, they're winning this division. Again, for a third straight year.
Overreaction Monday, the podcast, wherever you listen.
Issue, and that's because millions of Americans own homes with mortgages, and those mortgages can go delinquent on any given day. The thing about commercial real estate is typically these are 10-year notes that have bullet payments at the end, and so you might not see a default hit the system for years after the building lost all of its value. And so you'll see one loan go bad, and it might be another 18 months before you see another loan go bad. Those losses are going to be significant, and they're going to be concentrated in the regional bank sector, which is least able to bear it. It's not like all those loans are held by the mega banks in the United States. So it will be a problem. But I think that's less likely to be the cause of a giant disaster. In America, usually it's the consumer that causes the giant disaster. And the number that I'm looking at most right now is the fact that over the last 2 years, the average consumer went from spending 28% of his monthly income on housing costs to spending 42% of his monthly income today. And that's at a time when house prices are under pressure because no one can afford to borrow the money to buy a house. And so you've got inventory issues. So people are caught in this double bind. That tells me that the front end of a downturn is likely to come from the consumer side. It could come from increased mortgage defaults or at least a residential real estate slowdown. But whichever it is, Frank, it's a time for caution.
On there live with Brian P. Brooks, the former top bank regulator of the United States. And you have a thorough understanding of crypto better than anyone I've ever talked to on the issue. And what's even great for our listeners is that you explained it beautifully in plain English. And let me ask you about cryptos here and their performance this year, coming off the so-called crypto winter that we experienced last year. We see Bitcoin holding up pretty well here, above 28,000 at the moment. And the big news here in California is that the governor signed a bill that establishes a licensing process for crypto exchanges, which aims to create and provide protections for consumers somehow. Give us your reaction to what's happening with crypto and what's happening here in California.
Well, first of all, I think that the idea of state regulation of crypto is not going to be ultimately the way that market develops. And that's just because when you have an asset that is traded on a global basis, you can't have New York taking one approach, California taking a different approach, and Wyoming taking yet a different approach. But that's exactly what's happened as Congress has been gridlocked and paralysis over these issues. So at a superficial level, it's a good thing that Governor Newsom has said we're going to establish a licensing process. That sounds welcoming. For people in the industry who've lived with New York's process, however, for 5 or 6 years, which is really the model for the California approach, what they would tell you is the people who got licensed in New York basically got their feet set in concrete. Once you had that license, the New York regulators acquired jurisdiction over you and made it very hard for you to do anything. So just as an example, at Coinbase, where I used to work, we were adding tokens to the platform that were legal in 49 states. But New York told us, well, it's going to take us 6 months to assess this next asset that you might want to trade. And so there were times when people in 49 states could buy, 30 or 40 assets on the Coinbase platform, and people in New York could only buy 5. So in that sense, I think there's a lot of risk in allowing these states, which generally have a bias against new things. Generally they're very focused on protecting investors from themselves as opposed to facilitating investors getting what they want. And so I think there's a lot of potential risk in what he's done. But even so, better that people take the asset class seriously, better that there's some framework than none. And my hope remains that Congress will do something about this at a national level sooner rather than later.
I hope you understand what did just happen here in California. They call this California's answer to New York's BIT license. So maybe you can explain that for us so we can come close to understanding what the governor just did and what this means for the consumer.
Yeah, well, Frank, the way to think about it is in financial services, the thing that most people are most familiar with are banks, right? And the way that your bank exists is that some government agency gave the bank a charter to conduct a banking business. Most businesses that you do don't require a special government charter. Generally speaking, you can open a restaurant as long as you comply with the health code. You can buy and sell real estate with a simple licensing exam, but you don't have to have a special charter. banks have that. The concept of the BIT license in New York was to say, well, maybe we should treat crypto like banking, and we will charter crypto companies to do that business here, but they'll have special oversight that most companies don't have to undergo. And there's a lot of reasons to think that's a good thing. Supervision makes things safer, it makes fraud harder to happen, et cetera. But at the same time, it also makes the industry move a lot slower. So like the last time the banks innovated anything was sort of like when they invented the ATM machine in the 70s. And you don't think of banking as a super innovative business, even though it's important. And that has been the experience of the BIT license in New York. These companies came in, they got their charter, they thought it validated them, but then they found it was very, very hard to bring products to market as fast as consumers demanded them. And that market mostly shifted to other states that had more of a deregulatory approach. So I think the fear of some who are both investors and builders in this industry is that California will follow suit and they'll make this a big regulatory structure as opposed to an enabler of the asset class. So it remains to be seen. I won't prejudge, and the law doesn't take effect till 2025 anyway. But it's hopeful at least that the governor's taking it seriously. I'll say that.
Thank you for that thorough explanation. And you're right, this is set to take effect in July of 2025. So we have some time to digest all of that. In the meantime, what about the dollar? I remember your recent column in the Wall Street Journal focused on stable coins you said could keep the dollar the world's reserve currency. Looks like the dollar's gotten a boost with all this global tension nowadays. What about the dollar, and what about the cryptos in what's going on around the world at the moment?
I think there are mixed signals, to be quite honest. I mean, on the one hand, yes, in times of crisis, there's a flight to safety, and the dollar, as risky as it is relative to the past, is still the least risky currency asset in the world. So it's not surprising that in times of war, people want dollar assets. I've said before that one of the things we ought to think about as a country is how do we increase the demand for dollars in the world to counter some of the Chinese and Russian efforts to dump dollars. And I think that's all to the good. On the other hand, the price of Bitcoin is up about $1,500 a Bitcoin just over the last few days. It was trading in the 26s a few days ago. Now it's trading in the 28s. That's generally a bad sign for the dollar. That generally means that people are shifting assets into that asset class because they think it's uncorrelated with dollars and because they think that it has sounder monetary policy. So that would tend to be a kind of a brake light on markets' predictions about the future of the dollar. So I think it's hard to know. The long-term trends are away from the dollar. That's unfortunate.
Brian P. Brooks, the former top bank regulator in the United States. It's always an honor to speak with you. Thank you very much for taking the call. He's now a partner at the law firm O'Melveny & Myers and the former U.S. Comptroller of the Currency under President Donald J. Trump. Brian P. Brooks, thank you very much, sir. Thank you very much, and look forward to speaking with you again very, very soon on all these big issues here.
Thanks so much, Frank.
Thank you very much. Tom, you're terrific. Now, if you're hurt in an accident, folks, you need an experienced advocate, and Clark Fielding and his team of sharks at Fielding Law are on standby, ready to dive into your case. My friend Clark the Shark is fearless for justice and your go-to attorney when injured in an accident that wasn't your fault. Whether it's a car accident, slip, trip, fall, or any kind of personal injury, Fielding Law is here to make sure you get the care, attention, and compensation you deserve. Fielding Law can assess the circumstances of the case, negotiate tenaciously with the insurance companies, and if necessary, file a lawsuit and litigate to seek fair compensation on behalf of you, the injured party. An injury is a major disruption in your life. Medical expenses, lost wages, pain and suffering, property damage, and other losses incurred as a result of the injury are part of the damages. Don't try and handle the process alone. You need an expert in the process. The team at Fielding Law are the ones to trust. Put Clark Fielding's number in your phone under the word accident. That's 833-88-SHARK. Put it in the phone right now, 833-88-SHARK, or go to clarkthesharklaw.com. Mottek On Money continues here on 790 KBC. Good evening. Chance for you to win something now. 790 KBC welcomes Adam Sandler to the Honda Center October 23rd. Tickets on sale now at Ticketmaster.com. Right now, caller 9 wins at 1-888-790-5222. You can get a pair of tickets to the show if you're caller 9. Call right now, 1-888-790-5222. Losing day for the stock market. The Dow down 251 points to 33,414. The S&P 500 gave back 37 at 4,278. And the NASDAQ slid 128 at 13,186. This has the benchmark 10-year bond yield moved up to 4.99%. Highest seen since 2007. And that's sending fixed-rate mortgage rates to the highest seen in at least 23 years now. In the cryptos, we see a Bitcoin hovering at around $28,672, down about $50. Ethereum up $1 at $1,567. Doge right now at 6 cents. Price of oil shooting higher today, given the new tensions in the Middle East. Oil prices moved up after some military action. A Pentagon press secretary told reporters that a U.S. Navy destroyer intercepted 3 missiles and several drones that were launched by Houthi forces in Yemen. Their target, possibly Israel. Also, the U.S. Energy Department said it will post monthly solicitations to buy oil for its Strategic Petroleum Reserve through at least May of 2024, with the first request for up to 6 million barrels of oil for delivery in December and January. Price of crude oil in New York moving higher to nearly $91 a barrel, and Brent crude in London moving higher as well to now above $93 a barrel. Nervous time again at Southern California gas pumps, just as prices have come down from recent highs. Regular now averaging $5.76 a gallon. Premium still up there above $6 at $6.03 on average, and diesel now at $6.32 a gallon on average. Taking a look at some of the movers today, we see the airline stocks have been hit hard lately, but it looks like American Airlines rebounded a bit today. Shares of American up nearly 1%, bouncing off a 3-year low, even after the carrier reported third-quarter revenue that came up a bit short and provided a downbeat profit outlook given what's happening around the world. Shares of Equifax moving higher by more than 2%, shaking off an earlier loss seen after that credit score agency cut its outlook for the year over concerns that high mortgage rates are causing mortgage credit inquiries to track at a 37% decline for the year. Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. Good evening. Well, someone you've been seeing on television news for years, making news herself this week. Television news anchor and reporter CHRISTINA PASCUCCI has announced she is running for the California U.S. Senate seat held for years by the late Senator Dianne Feinstein. Joining us live now, CHRISTINA PASCUCCI. CHRISTINA, it's wonderful to speak with you. Thank you very much for taking the call, and congratulations on your big announcement right off the bat. I want to say you've earned the tremendous respect and admiration for everyone here in the news business, and indeed, they love you, CHRISTINA. So thank you very much for taking the call. And with that said, go ahead and give us your big announcement here.
I'm running for U.S. Senate. Thank you so much for having me. I really appreciate you, and I love you guys right back.
Thank you very much. You're speaking on 790 KBC, the home of the USC Trojans, by the way. Tell us about your background, CHRISTINA, and what brought you to this point to take on the 3 politicians and a baseball great who are running for the U.S. Senate seat here.
To enter the crazy world of politics. Well, I'm a native Angelino, born and raised in California. I love this state with all my heart and the people in it. And I went to USC, like you said, so a Trojan, fight on for anyone who's a Trojan who's listening. And I've reported on the streets of L.A. and across the state for more than, about 15 years now, reporting on some of the most pressing issues of our time. And when I started to look around me, I increasingly was not recognizing the state that I saw. So I've been wanting to do more outside of my journalism job. I've been doing a lot of advocacy work for much of my adult life around homelessness, foster youth, and underserved communities. And so I was already doing the work. But when I became pregnant, which is really another big announcement that I made, pregnant with my daughter, I had this fire ignited within me, Frank, that I knew I had to act. And I had to do something to make sure.
Former Navy SEAL Mike Ritland keeps it real on the Mic Drop podcast. Former Navy SEAL and current CrossFit King Dave Castro.
Is there one thing that you took away from the SEAL community that you apply kind of in your everyday life?
Here's the reality. So getting out was a no-brainer. Financially able to provide for my family much better with CrossFit than I was with the Navy. But if it hadn't been for CrossFit, I for sure would have stayed in for 20. I loved what I did.
Mic Drop. Raw. Unfiltered. Intellectually sound. Wherever you listen.
We lived in the same California that I got to enjoy as a little girl.
On the air live with CHRISTINA PASCUCCI. That is wonderful, CHRISTINA. And tell us about that. Of course, you've been covering so much tragedy and indeed the homeless situation, the crime here. Of course, you're speaking here on a business news program. I know you attend all the big business conferences here as well. And certainly it's tough out there. You put your heart into everything that you do. What would you do to turn things around here, especially here in the Los Angeles area?
There's a number of issues that I care about deeply. Mental health and homelessness is top of mind, and public safety. I have a personal connection to the world of mental health because I have a family member from addiction issues and also from mental health issues. And I saw, the trajectory of her life and always wondered if there had been intervention early on to help her, what would her path have looked like? And so I'm very passionate about that. I think when it comes to the homelessness crisis, we're not doing enough. Sure, billions have been spent, but where is the money going? And who is holding that money accountable? And I see a lot of that in Washington where we're spending a lot of money, but no one really pays attention to where it's going. And so I think that's an important piece. I mentioned I work with foster youth. They make up about half of the unhoused population. So it's really important to support them early on, and also especially transitional age foster youth, once they leave the system, they need to be supported as well. Those are some of the issues. You mentioned your business show. I think it's really important to talk about the overtaxing and regulation in this state that's made it really hard for businesses to thrive. And a lot of Democrats won't address what's happening at the border, and that's top of mind for me too, because I think it's a national security issue and a humanitarian crisis that we need to address head on.
And certainly small businesses make up a very high percentage of the businesses out there, especially here in Los Angeles. The LA Chamber will remind us about that. And you probably have interviewed Angela Marsden, for example, who owns the Pineapple Hill Saloon. She became famous when she blew up about what happened with during the COVID days, and when they had that catering operation next to her restaurant. Well, her restaurant was shut down. Certainly a very strong business advocate. Are you listening to voices like that and their concerns?
Oh, absolutely. And I have so many dear friends who are small business owners, and I've watched, up close as they've struggled the last couple of years, and it's been hard enough through the pandemic. They've already been through so much, and then they have to deal with regulations, and then they have to deal with the rise in crime and, burglaries and these smash and grabs that we're seeing. And there's just so much happening. We need to do more to make them feel protected and supported in their endeavors, because it's hard enough owning a small business without having to deal with all of these other issues.
Well, she'll be very happy to hear that, Christina. So thanks for sharing that. And I remember when you got your pilot's license, and I was near the Hollywood sign one day, and I said, was that you flying over the Hollywood sign? I saw a small plane, and sure enough, it was. You're an avid pilot too, right? Where have you been flying lately?
Yes, I started flying maybe 10 years ago. My biggest fears were small planes and heights. And so I took on the challenge. I actually did a series on it called On Air and In the Air with CHRISTINA PASCUCCI for one of my earlier markets. And when I went through that process and I did my first solo flight, I became hooked. And so I love to fly. I'm working on getting my instrument rating right now, which will help me fly in clouds and be a safer pilot, because with my child on the way, I want to make sure I stay as safe as possible.
That's wonderful, and congratulations on that big news, certainly. And certainly with all the things happening around the world at the moment, with tensions running high in the Middle East, the Russia-Ukraine war continuing. You yourself went to Ukraine, right, early on in the war, and you're an avid traveler. Tell us about that, and what kind of travel experience will you bring to Washington?
Well, I've traveled to more than 100 countries across 7 continents, to a lot of conflict areas, war zones. I was in Ukraine, like you said. That was really the honor of a lifetime to be able to tell the stories of the people on the ground there. I've been to the Middle East, to Haiti, Latin America on these missions. And one of the things I've done also is I've been on the board of an organization that works with children of war. And it's something I'm very passionate about, to make sure that children's, basic needs are met. And especially when you find them in these conflict zones, they're the ones who suffer most often. So that's been a big part of my life. And I've seen firsthand the atrocities of war and how it impacts these kids. And when you look at what's happening in Israel right now, which I know has been top of mind for so many people, part of the reason we need leaders who put people over politics, which is the pillar of my campaign, is because of what's happening in Israel right now. As I know, Frank, we have a House who doesn't have a speaker. Hardcore Republicans are holding up promotions in the military, and we should be focused on leading through the crisis unfolding in the Middle East, but instead we're fractured as a nation, and some have lost their humanity. So that is a big reason why I think it's so important to have a unifying figure like me, someone who plans to reach across the aisle and get meaningful things done for the people of America and beyond.
And I noticed you also went on the Spanish stations speaking Spanish, right?
Puedo hablar en español.
Muy bien.
Yes. Yeah. I think it's really important. That's also what I've done. I've worked in Latino communities for much of my career, telling their stories. And unfortunately, a lot of times the only time I hear from people who are running for office is right before the election. But I've always been there because I think it's really important. My own mother is an immigrant, and so I really empathize with immigrant families and all that they have to go through as they try to reach the California dream that, frankly, is becoming harder for all of us to reach.
Christina, thank you very much for coming to the line here. I hope this is the first of many conversations with you live on the air here. We wish you and your family all the very best, your mom and your entire family. Thanks so much for sharing your great story with us and the big news here on the expectant daughter, right? You said coming.
Yes. Thank you, Frank. It's a pleasure to talk to you. I love your work, and I really appreciate the time.
Likewise, Christina.
Can I say Christina for California? ChristinaForCalifornia.com if anyone wants to check it out.
ChristinaForCalifornia.com is the website. We've been speaking to Christina PASCUCCI, candidate for the U.S. Senate. Thank you very much, Christina, for joining us here this evening.
Thank you.
Mottek On Money continues here in 790 KBC. We'll check this out. The hotel industry fighting what's called the Responsible Hotel Ordinance being proposed here in Los Angeles. It's actually going to be on the ballot in March of 2024. Basically, what it means is hotels will be ordered to house homeless people alongside paying guests if they have vacancies on a daily basis. Business travelers, tourists, and visitors will be side by side in the hallways, elevators, lobby, and breakfast rooms with people who have been relocated from a nearby tent encampment to enjoy the same accommodations paid for by city taxpayers, essentially. Voters will decide this coming up about 5 months from now. Joining us live now is Chip Rogers, President and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. Chip, thank you very much for taking the call and for shedding more attention on this big issue here. Give us your reaction to this idea, first of all.
One of the dumbest things I've ever heard. In fact, it might be the dumbest public policy I've ever seen suggested.
And would decimate tourism here in Los Angeles, probably, right?
Well, look, are you going to book a hotel room in the city of Los Angeles knowing that the person next to you might have just been homeless the night before? The reality is homelessness is a very serious problem. This proposal by the local union, and they are the ones who funded it, they're the ones who gathered the signatures, they're the ones who turned in the signatures. This proposal is making a mockery of a very serious problem. Homelessness is something that needs to be dealt with. This idea that you're going to take homeless and put them inside of hotel rooms right next door to paying guests in the same lobby and the same swimming areas and the gym, it's not going to work. And it's putting this is the scariest thing of all, Frank. Think about an organization, the union, that by force takes union dues from their members, whether they want to or not. They then use that money to put those very members in physical danger. It's unbelievable that they're getting away with this. I just don't understand why the union members themselves haven't risen up against this and told their union to stop.
You probably heard that story or saw that story about somebody squatting in an Airbnb for more than a year now. And what happens if this thing passes and the homeless end up squatting in the hotel rooms? What happens then?
Well, if the hotel is still in business, and they'll probably go out of business rather quickly, you can already see, Frank, exactly what the problem is. And given a city like Los Angeles that has a widely recognized crime problem, do we really want to take law enforcement resources and have them spending their days evicting homeless people from hotels? I mean, this is a total and complete waste of time. It's a waste of taxpayers' money. It is a terrible idea. And at the end of the day, the one organization outside of us that should be protecting hotel employees is the union, and they're actually working against us to put those employees in danger.
And one thing that's deceptive here is what they call these initiatives. This one is called the Responsible Hotel Ordinance. What's your reaction to that title?
It's ridiculous. Why is a hotel responsible for solving homelessness any more than an accounting firm a car wash, a movie theater, any business out there. Their suggestion is that hotels take up, I guess, real estate that should be used for affordable housing. Well, you could make that argument about any building that's constructed in the entire city of Los Angeles. It's absurd on its face. And by definition, actually, hotels do provide housing to paying guests that are in the city. So the entire thing is a harebrained idea. But sadly, it's not just funny, it's dangerous. And they've got to pull it off the ballot. The union can pull it off the ballot before December the 8th. We're asking all elected officials and all Angelenos to stand up and tell the union, do not put your own members in physical danger.
Tell us about the efforts that'll be ongoing. It's going to be on the ballot in just about 5 months from now. Your association and other tourist groups certainly speaking out against this. So we're going to be hearing more about this between now and then?
We will. We just launched a new campaign. You can see all about it at angelenosprotectinghospitality.com. You can learn all about this. We just finished some recent polling that showed that almost 3/4 of Americans who were polled said that if this goes into place, they are not coming and booking a hotel room in the city of Los Angeles. That will be devastating to the Los Angeles economy.
Remember the days when San Francisco, which was such a big convention city, that business has dried up. And certainly if this passes here, we would probably have the same situation.
Absolutely. In fact, the owner of the 2 largest hotels in San Francisco recently just handed the keys back to the bank. And their statement was, we see no future in the convention market in San Francisco that can support these hotels. In other words, the bookings that you're expecting 2 and 3 years out just aren't materializing. The same exact thing is going to happen in Los Angeles. People have to stop electing and making bad decisions at the ballot box.
That is absolutely amazing. Well, Chip Rogers, thank you very much for that important update tonight. We're going to keep an open line to you as this unfolds, as we get closer to Election Day, March 2024. When Los Angeles voters will decide whether to require hotels to put homeless folks side by side with paying guests in the hotel rooms here in Los Angeles. Chip Rogers, the president and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association, thank you very much for joining us live here tonight.
Frank, great to be with you.
Likewise. Thank you very, very much. Coming up next, the 790 KBC News Blitz with our legal eagle, Royal Oaks. This is Mottek On Money on 790 KBC.
Every Monday, Rich Eisen and Chris Brockman react to what's happening in the world of football on Overreaction Monday.
The AFC North. Not all 4 teams are going to make the playoffs.
More likely than not.
More likely than not, right?
Okay.
And I know they've been the king of this jungle for the last few seasons. The Cincinnati Bengals, Rich, are going to miss the playoffs this year.
This is an overreaction. Bengals are not only making the playoffs, they're winning this division. Again, for a 3rd straight year.
Overreaction Monday, the podcast, wherever you listen.